You're listening to the Cyberwire Network, powered by N2K.
Having a strong identity system is completely correlated to progress. These type of identities can make a big, big difference.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Caveat, the CyberWire's privacy surveillance law and policy podcast. I'm Dave Bittner, and joining me is my co-host Ben Yellen from the University of Maryland Center for Health and Homeland Security. Hello, Ben.
Hello, Dave.
Today, Ben talks about the state of Indiana taking legal action against TikTok. I look at the collapse of the FTX exchange and the arrest of its founder. And later in the show, Ricardo Ampere from Encode, we're talking about the egalitarian promise of digital identity. While this show covers legal topics and Ben is a lawyer, the views expressed do not constitute legal advice. For official legal advice on any of the topics we cover, please contact your attorney. Now, a word from our sponsor, the Johns Hopkins University Information Security Institute, currently seeking qualified applicants for its innovative Master of Science in Security Informatics degree program. Study alongside world-class interdisciplinary experts and gain unparalleled educational, research, and professional experience in information security and assurance. Interested U.S. citizens should consider the National Science Foundation's CyberCore Scholarship for Service program, which covers tuition and a $6,000 annual professional development allowance, as well as providing a $37,000 additional annual stipend. Apply for the scholarship and the fall semester by March 1st. Learn more at cs.jhu.edu/MSSI. All right, Ben, why don't we jump right into our stories this week? You want to lead things off for us?
Sure. So many states have been taking action against TikTok. I know in our state of Maryland, they banned the use of TikTok among state government agencies. So no more funny videos from the Department of Traffic about snowstorms. We have to suffer without that.
Okay.
But one state is taking things a step further, and that's the state of Indiana. Its Attorney General, Todd Rokita, is suing TikTok under a state consumer protection statute. So the allegation is that TikTok has deceived its users about China's access to their data. And he's also concerned, and he expressed this in the lawsuit, that TikTok is exposing children to mature content. And this is the first time that a state has taken action in court against TikTok. It's going to go to the Indiana Superior Court, so it'll be a state-based case. The allegation about China is interesting. It echoes, I think, what we've heard from federal secretaries, including the FBI Director Christopher Wray and Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen, that this is a parent company that has very close ties to the Chinese government. And, you know, we've talked about on previous episodes that they could mine this treasure trove of data from TikTok for all different types of purposes, including national security related intelligence stuff, just because it's such a rich source of data. TikTok, for its part, has tried really hard to prove its disassociation with the Chinese government. And I think the adjudication of this case will depend on how believable that is. They have offices located in several locations across the world that are not China. And so I think they've tried to emphasize that though their parent company is a Chinese company, they are not beholden to the Chinese government. The chief executive of TikTok mentioned that the data of U.S. users is actually hosted on servers controlled by an American cloud computing company, being Oracle. And he said that the Chinese government would not be able to access that data. The Indiana Attorney General pushes back against those claims in this lawsuit, saying that Chinese law gives the government the authority to demand data from a U.S. affiliate of a Chinese company. And even though TikTok has eventually promised to delete all of the U.S. users' data from the cloud, it's unclear how that's actually going to work in practice and whether data is going to be sufficiently protected. So The lawsuit here is not just about the fact that China has played such a large role in this company and that there are risks to the users in Indiana who use TikTok. Part of it is that the lawsuit alleges that people in Indiana have been misled, that TikTok has not properly represented its relationship with the Chinese government and has made assurances about their data that don't stand up to the facts on the ground. And I think the ultimate result of this lawsuit is going to depend on that divide, whether TikTok can convince the court that it actually protects U.S. persons' data, or whether the state of Indiana can prove that they're still susceptible to Chinese blackmail and the forces of their authoritarian power.
Could the local TikTok folks, perhaps I can coin a new term here, eulogize this? Could they take the EULA, which I'm reminded from one of our other shows, Joe and I got scolded for not explaining what the term EULA means, so it's End User License Agreement. Could TikTok change their EULA and say, hey, everybody, if you want to use TikTok, your data might go to China?
So I don't think you can eulogize your way out of this, so to speak. I think it's already in their EULA. Everything they would need to say to cover themselves legally is probably already in there.
Right.
As you can expect, I'm a limited TikTok user, but I did not read the full 400-some-odd page EULA.
Oh, come on. That's entertainment for lawyers like
I
you,
know.
isn't it?
I mean, I know I'm supposed to, but
Okay.
I fell asleep through the first paragraph. So
Okay.
I'm sure they've covered their legal bases there. But I think it's just a question of the veracity of their claims. You know, I think they try and disclaim any liability by saying it's possible under some circumstances that even though we try to protect the data, it's going to be susceptible to government requests on, in limited circumstances. I'm sure that's something that's in the EULA itself. But what the state of Indiana is saying is that they are misrepresenting their security to their customers in their public statements. So beyond what's on the terms and conditions that nobody reads are public assurances that the data is safe and it's not prone to collection by the Chinese government. I think what this lawsuit is saying is that those attestations on behalf of TikTok and its CEO aren't backed up by what actually happens, and that the risks of Chinese access haven't properly been disclosed to TikTok users. I think one potential strength of this lawsuit in Indiana is looking at what's happening overseas in Europe. So in Europe, because of their stricter data privacy laws, TikTok has been forced to disclose that their data can be accessed by individuals outside Europe, including those in China. I think they made those assurances / caveats, if you will, in their terms of service in Europe because they realized they could face accountability under GDPR. Because they don't face that level of accountability in the United States, I don't know how strong the data protection laws are in Indiana. I don't think they're particularly strong.
Right.
We're not talking about California or Virginia, some of the states that have passed these data privacy laws. They might not have disclaimed that liability or put a provision like that in the end user license agreement in Indiana. But the fact that they put this in the EULA in Europe might indicate what their actual practices are. So in the words of the Indiana Attorney General, that is misleading and deceiving Indiana customers.
So what are they after here? What is Indiana looking to get out of this?
So they want an injunction that would force TikTok to stop giving, basically be a court-ordered mandate to stop giving any data to the Chinese government. And they're seeking what I would characterize as nominal damages. So they're asking for $5,000 per violation. That might add up when you think about TikTok and how many users it has nationally. Indiana's a state that probably has a population of some 8 to 10 million. So you calculate the number of kids and discerning adults and teenagers who are obsessed with, the latest TikTok trends. That's going to be a lot of users. I don't think it would bankrupt TikTok to have to pay that level of damages. I think they're more interested in the type of injunction that would force TikTok to take some type of corrective action. And I think if TikTok sees that this is not just limited to the state of Indiana, that this is a model lawsuit, and that they're potentially going to be held liable in other states, not to mention that they're still under threat from being shut down or significantly regulated by the federal government, that might force them to change their practices, or at least change some of these alleged misrepresentations in their terms of service.
So is the idea here that that TikTok has the burden of proof on them to demonstrate that they've put whatever they need to put in place so that it's not possible for them to share this data with the Chinese?
So in a technical sense, the burden of proof is on the state of Indiana because they're the ones initiating the lawsuit.
Right.
So
interesting.
it's a civil case, which means the standard is preponderance of the evidence, which is 50% plus one. You know, you don't have to be as sure as you are about putting somebody in jail, but you have to have the better argument. So I think the state of Indiana is going to have to argue in court that TikTok is misleading its customers. We might get to the point where there's kind of a de facto portion of the lawsuit, maybe that comes out in discovery, where TikTok is forced to put up or shut up and show to some level of particularity, and these are probably going to be in ex parte proceedings, that the way they are protecting their data complies with the terms of this Indiana statute. But at least from a facial level, the burden of proof is still on the state of Indiana to show that they are violating this consumer protection statute.
How do you think it's going to play out?
I think this is going to be one of those endless lawsuits where we go through years of discovery without much happening.
Oh, goody.
I know. I always want to have some satisfying solution here so that we can get some legal clarity. I also think we know that this is not going to be the only state-based case against TikTok. You know, I think states like to copy each other. Maryland might have been the first or second to prohibit the use of TikTok among state employees. I know Utah was another state that took that action. So generally, these types of cases come in bunches, and you might see a series of state cases. It would really only take one successful case in one sympathetic court to get TikTok to really alter its practices and do a better job of safeguarding the data. But it just remains to be seen whether any of these states can get past that threshold matter of showing in court that they're actually misrepresenting themselves in a way that violates consumer protection laws.
Yeah. All right. Well, nothing to do but wait, right? Keep an eye on it.
Yeah, I wish this could be one of those things where, like, you know, within 1 or 2 weeks, we could have some preliminary resolutions so that we could give our listeners an answer here. But
I mean, could TikTok basically just put an end to this by saying, hey, you know, here's everything you need to know, and here's what we're doing to make the changes you requested. So go away, please.
Yes, they could try and do that.
Yeah.
That could be part of a pretrial settlement, and they might do that. Their other option, which is what I suspect they'll probably do, is answer the complaint in Indiana court with kind of a point-by-point, you know, denying with some level of specificity all of the allegations in the complaint. And I think that seems to be the strategy that they're going to take if you take their public statements as any indication.
Okay.
They have pretty good lobbyists and lawyers in the United States, and I think they've done a good job, particularly at the federal level, convincing policymakers that they are not a pushover for the Chinese communist government.
And yet the director of the FBI remains skeptical.
Right. Well, it's a little hard to buy off the director of the FBI. You know, members of Congress, you can wine and dine, take them to the nicest D.C. restaurants.
Right. He's such a buzzkill.
I know, they're not as...
Ray. Yeah.
Yeah, and my sister... Secretary Yellen.
Sister by another mother.
By another mother, exactly.
Right.
So, you know, I tend to think that they have a pretty good public relations strategy so far. And they have a major advantage in the court of public opinion because they are the most popular social network in the country at the moment.
Mm-hmm.
And they have the youngest user base, which means TikTok is very valuable to advertisers. And that's something that could certainly factor into this.
Right.
So it's a money-making machine.
For everybody.
Everybody uses it.
Mm-hmm.
And certainly the biggest companies in the country have taken advantage of that. So, perhaps they weigh in on this Indiana lawsuit and say, you know what? We're pretty confident in TikTok too.
Let's not be hasty here.
Let's not be too hasty. I think we can all benefit from this relationship.
Right.
TikTok is standing pretty strong in how it's responding via statements through its legal counsel and other representatives, basically saying that they're confident that they will fully satisfy all reasonable U.S. national security concerns, and that they've tried to implement solutions to prevent the undue collection of data. So we'll see how believable that is in a court of law, if it ever gets to that point.
All right. Well, we will have a link to that story in the show notes. I want to talk this week about FTX and Sam Bankman-Fried, who's the founder of FTX. Now,
30-year-old wonderkind who is now, I think as we speak, he's probably in the process of getting extradited to the United States. He was arrested last night in the Bahamas.
Yes.
So you're just enjoying a nice vacation at Atlantis, going down the water slide, and those Bahamanian law enforcement officers pull you right out of the water.
They're just waiting there with a nice, fluffy, dry towel.
Exactly.
So I want to go through this together because we haven't really talked about this here, and I think there are a number of really interesting policy elements to this that we can dig into. Are you familiar with this enough that you could just give a little bit of the backstory of what FTX is and who this guy is and why we should care about them?
Sure. So FTX is a cryptocurrency company. They had really gained in prominence over the past several years. I kind of knew them from their advertising. Every umpire in Major League Baseball has or at least had an FTX logo on their jersey. So it had gained in prominence as kind of the second generation of crypto companies after we got the Bitcoins of the world.
Right.
Samuel Bankman-Fried was their CEO. And he had gotten in trouble with the U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission for basically misleading the consumers about the benefits of this online cryptocurrency platform. He has denied any criminal liability. He said he never, quote, tried to commit fraud. But
who does?
Right, exactly. There are also money laundering charges that have been alleged as part of this criminal complaint. So it's, I think, part of a broader picture where the cryptocurrency industry is kind of falling apart. Cryptocurrency lost a lot of value in markets over the past year.
Right.
I think the bubble, as most bubbles do, kind of come crashing down.
Yeah.
And FTX was kind of at the center of that. What I think Bankman-Fried has tried to do is go on a bit of a public apology tour where he says, I might have made some mistakes, but I never committed fraud. And I think that was a huge mistake on his part because
the SEC begs to differ.
Right, and generally, if you're facing legal liability, the last thing you should want to do is make a bunch of public statements. And I think the last element that we should consider here is he was due to testify in front of the House Banking Committee, and there was some question about whether he was going to show up. It seemed like he was going to write a statement, but might not show up. So that's kind of another element. Did I miss anything? Or is that?
No, I think you're absolutely right. And my understanding is that some members of the media have seen his prepared statement, so they know what he was going to say. He's not going to say it because, as you say, he's in the process of being extradited.
Can I just add one thing really quickly?
Yeah.
The media has released the first line of his opening statement at his what was going to be his testimony in front of the the House Banking Committee.
Right.
And I'm going to quote this without using the actual swear word in this sentence.
Okay.
But the first line was, I would like to start by formally stating under oath, I blanked up.
He effed up.
He effed up, yeah.
Okay.
So, what a guy, this SBF.
Well, yeah. Here's what I'm curious to chat with you about with this is I'm trying to separate the alleged fraud here, the alleged mismanagement of this company with cryptocurrency, the exchanges, the currencies themselves writ large, because I think they're two different things. I think there's a lot of people who are sort of celebrating the collapse of this because they're saying, see, I told you so. There's nothing to any of this crypto stuff. It's all a ripoff. It's a house of cards. It's it's tulip madness all over again. It's Beanie Babies. There was never any value here. Ha ha. You all got what you deserve.
No one will be laughing when I sell my Beanie Babies collection and make millions. So let's just hold off on that.
So, but that's different from what is alleged to have been going on behind the scenes here, which is, Bankman-Fried was allegedly funneling billions of dollars to his own hedge fund, mismanagement, giving himself loans worth billions of dollars. So all sorts of behind-the-scene things that are bad stuff, bad allegations.
Known as fraud in the industry. Yep.
Right. But that doesn't necessarily mean that, and let me just say at the outset here, I'm not trying to be an apologist for any of the cryptocurrency folks. I count me as a cryptocurrency skeptic, right?
Same here. And I think I've been from the beginning. It just never made sense to me. And I've had friends tell me how wrong I am. But you and I have stood pretty strong on this over the years.
So that's where I'm trying to come at this from is the difference between, could this have been, garden variety, albeit with large sums of money, garden variety fraud, which is alleged here, versus the fundamental underpinnings of the exchange and cryptocurrency itself. Can we separate the two, or are they hopelessly intertwined?
So I think you make a good point. I think there are two separate issues. One is with the enterprise itself, and then the other is with Samuel Bankman-Fried, who is just kind of a con artist.
Allegedly.
Allegedly,
right.
Yes. This has not been proven in a court of law. Right. Wait for the actual case.
Right. This allegedly brought to you by the Cyberwire's legal team.
I loved the radio voice you used when you did that. So starting with SBF, I think we've seen actors like this in the financial sector pre-cryptocurrency, and we will see it post-cryptocurrency. I mean, he's basically a crypto Bernie Madoff.
Yeah.
And this is a pyramid scheme where he was taking other people's money and fraudulently using it for his own enrichment. Allegedly.
And it's all great as long as the prices keep going up.
Right. People start to notice when the industry comes collapsing upon itself. The second element of it, apart from SBF and FTX, is what's happening in the industry itself. I would say that, yes, you can isolate Samuel Bankman-Fried. It's not endemic to cryptocurrency to have somebody who's alleged of doing these terrible things. But I think it's particularly prone to it for a couple of reasons. One is just our past experience. We know that several of these exchanges have been under federal investigation. Binance being one of them, the world's largest cryptocurrency exchange. Some of their top executives have been under investigation for potential fraud. And the other reason I think it might be more prone to this type of fraud is because it's new and it's relatively unregulated.
Right.
So it's one of those, it's not a sufficient explanation to say, oh, this is cryptocurrency. Of course, this is by nature fraudulent. I think that's just kind of one ingredient into what happened with Samuel Bankman-Fried and FTX.
Let's talk about the regulatory element, though, because I think there are lots of people who will look at this and say, well, crypto has been an interesting playground, right? I mean, it's been an interesting test case to have, could this be the future of finance? And is it better to let the market decide? Is it better to let these things play out? The regulators have been, as you say, relatively hands-off when it comes to this. So there are some who would say, well, that's great. That's the way it should be. I imagine at this point there are some saying, see, told you so. These knuckleheads can't be unregulated. We gotta get them under control here.
Yeah, I mean, I do not want to get too political here, but we've seen this happen numerous times. This is not a cryptocurrency problem. This is a financial regulation problem. There end up being these dangerous financial products that are getting a lot of people rich. And when those products are valuable, when everybody's making billions off of cryptocurrency or subprime mortgage loans or the dot-com boom in the late 1990s, I think the SEC and other government agencies are like, you know what, let's not mess with this. Sometimes they'll even take deregulatory efforts to kind of let the market flourish. And then there's always the proverbial turd in the punch bowl, usually a consumer advocacy group that's like, hey, this is actually presenting some risks. We've built this house of cards that's very unstable, and if it's not properly regulated, when it comes crashing down, we're going to discover a lot behind the scenes about what went wrong.
Elizabeth Warren's kind of built her career on
She's been doing this her entire life. I mean, that's one of the reasons we have the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau is we wanted to prevent something like this from happening in the future. So one thing that's frustrating to me is not enough people, when cryptocurrency was valuable, and this was a very late 2021 mindset, but not enough people stopped and said, now is actually the time where regulators should get their hands on this, because yes, it might cut against the value of cryptocurrency, but if something seems too good to be true, it almost always is, and it's better for regulators to get involved early before you have a situation like you have here where people are getting arrested and individual innocent Americans who have invested their earnings in cryptocurrency exchanges are really suffering as a result of what's gone on in this market over the past year. So that's just my personal view. I think the libertarian view is that whenever the government gets involved at any point, things inevitably get worse. And I think the other side of the ledger is this is what happens to an industry that is under-regulated.
Yeah. And I mean, partially to your point, there are a lot of like retirement funds and things like that were heavily invested in this and have lost their money. I suppose you could say, well, they rolled the dice, they took the risk. Everybody knew this was high risk. It was high risk, high reward potential. Right, so dial in your risk, your risk ratio, your ability to absorb risk, and off you go. But at the same time, I can't help wondering, will this be the thing that triggers more scrutiny and perhaps more regulation for the whole industry?
One funny anecdote about all of this is there was a Super Bowl commercial with Larry David. It's actually, to me, it's one of the funniest Super Bowl commercials I've ever seen, even though it was apocryphal. So they have Larry David at various points in history kind of poo-pooing various modern inventions.
Right.
So he's like, a wheel, what are we going to use that for?
Right.
And then at the end, you have this guy in Larry David's office trying to sell him on FTX as a currency exchange. And Larry David's like, I don't buy it, and I've never been wrong about this type of thing. And the irony of this is that the character that Larry David is playing in that commercial has actually been vindicated. Because this all did come crashing down.
Their own commercial.
Within a year. And it was their own commercial. So, I do feel sorry for people who took this risk. Yes, they did know it was a risk. Lots of financial products that have, I would say every financial product that seems to have an unlimited reward comes with what should to most people be an intolerable level of risk. But That's why regulations are important, so that you can minimize those risks and also make sure it doesn't have downstream ripple effects on the economy.
Yeah.
I don't think cryptocurrency has risen to the level of prominence in the macroeconomy that it's going to have the type of effect that the collapse of the housing market did in 2008, for example. So I think we can be sort of grateful that this bubble burst before we got hurt even more as a country.
If you're one of the other exchanges, what are you thinking right now?
I would get all of my legal ducks in order and make sure that
maybe it's time for a little internal audit.
Yeah, I would check our own books and just expect that there is going to be a DOJ, SEC, or IRS investigation at some point, and make sure that every last dollar is accounted for. Because I think this SBF experience will lead regulators, particularly at the SEC, to put a watchful eye, whether fair or not, onto all of these other cryptocurrency exchanges.
Yeah. All right. Well, I'll have links to a couple of the stories that are covering this in the show notes. I mean, this one's everywhere, so it's not hard to find. We would love to hear from you. If there's something you'd like us to discuss here on the show, you can email us. It's caveat@thecyberwire.com. And now, a word from our sponsor, SpyCloud, the cybercrime analytics leader. SpyCloud disrupts cybercrime by telling you what criminals know about your business and your customers, so you can take action to prevent ransomware, session hijacking, account takeover, and online fraud. SpyCloud constantly recaptures and analyzes new data from the criminal underground, including credentials, session cookies, and PII siphoned from malware-infected devices. With knowledge of the specific exposed data criminals have in hand from InfoStealer malware on managed and unmanaged devices, security teams can respond with a more efficient and effective process called post-infection remediation that fits seamlessly into existing incident response frameworks. Get SpyCloud's post-infection remediation guide outlining the 7 steps for preventing a malware infection from becoming a full-blown ransomware incident. Visit spycloud.com/cyberwire. That's spycloud.com/cyberwire. And we thank SpyCloud for sponsoring our show. Ben, I recently had the pleasure of speaking with Ricardo Ampere from Encode, and we're talking about digital identity and some of the promise that has as we move forward. Here's my conversation with Ricardo Ampere.
From a digital identity perspective, there's a big revolution happening around the world. And it happened because with COVID, there was a big change. Before COVID, when you wanted or when someone wanted to verify people's identity in a high security setting, they would ask someone to go to a physical place and have a human being verify their identity. And of course, for obvious reasons, people didn't want to go to doctors or notaries, or didn't want to go to a bank branch. And digital identity, high security digital identity, became really important. And in that sense, what changed was that companies needed to find an alternative that was technologically viable and was online to verify people's identity with ease and with security. And not just that, the fact that identity was based, it still is based on a piece of paper, which was an Egyptian invention from 3,000 year old. And the fact that we can't learn from someone's identity, and we have to repeat the process of asking for an ID and proof of address and many things over time, makes it a very, very obsolete industry that is primed for this change.
Yeah, it's a really interesting point. You know, I think about my youngest son who's working on getting his driver's license, and just everything we have to go through with that, of getting a copy of his birth certificate and, you know, all those sorts of things. And is your sense that that's simply not good enough anymore?
It is absolutely not good enough. As you know, many people in the U.S., for several purposes, buy fake IDs. It's easy. You get it through FedEx and DHL. And to go through that process that your son is going of verifying that he knows how to drive and that he is who it is, so that very easily someone else can take his identity, is something that I don't think it's cool and appropriate.
Well, I think about my own experience, and as you mentioned, I'd say my driver's license is my primary form of identification. Where do you suppose we're heading then? I mean, what could replace that?
Yeah, so if you think about the things that are wrong, are first, as I said, it's a piece of paper. B, that is based on human beings trying to verify that with all the biases, unconscious or conscious, that human beings have. The third is that you have to repeat the process over and over. You can't learn from your previous experience, so that every time it's easier and more secure. And a big one is privacy, that you have to go, and for every bottle of beer you want to buy, you have to show your ID, and the tender knows exactly where you live, what your blood type, you're the donor. Just doesn't make sense. So we're going to a place where IDs are more accessible because it's online and you don't have to go to a physical place, where there's a lot less bias, because even for all the bias that people think about machine learning and technology, it's a lot less than humans. And so we think an identity that's more inclusive and accessible because it's just a fairer identity. One where with all the consent of users and embracing the privacy laws, we can understand through your behavior if you're you or not, and every experience that you go through, it's just easier than the previous one. That's the third one, and finally privacy, that you can buy the bottle of beer by attesting that you're over 21, or you can be on the metaverse with a different name, different form factor, but still you're safe to interact with kids. So we're going into much more intelligent, accessible, and safer identity.
And how would this work? I mean, if I'm walking up to buy that 6-pack of beer and I'm going to interact with the person behind the counter, how do both of us do that?
So imagine the first thing is that you need to prove that you're you, and there's a certain set of technologies that help you to do that. The iPhone made facial recognition accessible, and everybody's now feels good by looking at your phone. You can get access to it. So imagine it's the same technology. You go to that store, you show your face, and you give consent. The only thing that person gets is that person is over 21. Or you look at your phone and you show your phone, and you present your phone through wireless technologies, and we can do exactly the same. We essentially transfer a certificate that that person knows that you're 21, and if you get audited, I mean, they won't get audited, but think about a use case that's a little bit more serious like that. It's important that the person who's actually giving the service has some sense of auditability and a certificate that person can show to an authority, proving that they're actually complying with the law, but not necessarily they have to have information that is just completely irrelevant.
Well, I think about, from a security point of view, again, going to my driver's license, it has a hologram on there that helps, verify that it's legitimate. Is the digital certificates that we're talking about, is that the digital equivalent of that hologram?
Yeah, it's a good comparison. The security features that are on your driver license were made so that very easily with light or just basic equipment, you can prove that was a genuine identity. And then you look at the picture, you compare that, and yes, it's that person. So it's the same thing, but digitally, but except with the fact that it's just very easy to fake a driver license nowadays, even if you're comparing the information versus an information that's provided by the DMV. It's just very easy to take a picture of an existing real driver license and use that information, or just copy that into a new driver license. So instead of that, you use biometrics and other technologies so that you, through a certificate that's literally impossible to fake because it's using cryptography, you can actually prove certain characteristics about the person. And everything, by the way, is with consent. So you have that use case of retail, but just think about banking. Think about how cool it would be if you already are using, let's say, a company that uses Encode, and the next time you're going to go open a bank account, it's just a matter of presenting your face, presenting a second factor like your last four digits of your social or your phone number. And then with that, we consent, you transfer just the information that the bank needs from you, nothing more, nothing less. And with that, in 30 seconds, you have a high security transaction that's a lot easier. We think that's where we're going.
And what is the initial setup like? I mean, how do I establish to my mobile device, let's say my iPhone, that I am indeed who I say I am?
Well, there's going to be different ways how you do it. Some of them are going to be by relying on your phone, although we don't think it's the perfect one because your phone can be stolen. The best way is yourself, right? Like they can steal a password, they can steal a device, but it's very difficult to steal a face, particularly with kind of world-class technologies like we and others have. And so imagine, walking to one of the fintechs customers like that we have, such as, for example, Chime, or customers like we have at Citibank. And imagine that you go open that bank account, you provide that information, but the next time that you do that, it's just going to be easier because with your consent, we have that information and we can share it in an intelligent way to the next company that you want to interact with. And as you go through that process, it just becomes a lot easier. Now think about the country. Think about a person who is doing fraud right now. These people go from bank A to B to C doing fraud, and these banks don't talk to each other, at least from identity. They do for credit fraud because there's a credit bureau. But from an identity perspective, they have no way of knowing. And so with what we're proposing is there's a way where banks don't have to share the information. But when we see a face and when we see a driver license, we can ask the banks, hey, is this Dave or not? Is not telling me, give me all the information about Dave into a that I can store and then maybe hackers can get into that. It's not that. It's just asking them, hey, is this face or is this driver license Dave? And they answer yes or no. And with that, it's impossible for fraudsters to go from one bank to the other.
Tell me about some of the privacy features here. I mean, I think for a lot of folks, they may be concerned or uncomfortable with the notion of having their ID scanned and then stored. You know, I could see if someone went to a medical clinic or a gay bar or something like that. How do you ensure that privacy is maintained?
I think there's a misconception where a lot of people think that privacy laws are a problem for our industry. Actually, it's a blessing for our industry because what they did is they changed the premise of who is the owner of the information. Before those privacy laws, the banks and the bars, so whoever you asked for that information became the owner of that, and then they could share it to other people without your consent. And by these laws asserting that the citizen is the owner of their identity means that the citizens are in the driver's seat. And so they can make the decision of which companies they want to interact with, which technologies they want to be part of it. And that allows us to be breaking information silos and enable use cases like the ones that I just described. Think about the status quo. What is easier? If you go and show your ID to buy a beer or to get into the stadium, it's just very easy for someone to just take a picture of that and they have all your information. And then if you compare that to the digital equivalent, when we ask for ID, we don't store a photo of your ID. We don't store a photo of your face. We store a cryptographic equivalent of that, a hash that represents that information. But even if it's stolen, even if it's unencrypted, it's not a picture. It's not something that they can go and transfer and use. And so if you compare the status quo versus that, it's like exponentially easier for people right now with the current status quo just to take a picture versus getting your information the way we store it.
So if I'm understanding you, I mean, is it correct that, say, for example, I wanted to go buy that beer, I could set it up to say that really all I want to do is verify that I'm old enough to do this. They don't need to know my name. They don't need to know my address. All they need to know is that I am indeed old enough to make this purchase.
It's exactly right. And so that's the only information that they keep. And even, companies that did more information, like, for example, a bank or a fintech or a doctor, the way they get that information is in a way where it's just much more protected. They know just information that you need to give it to them. They don't have, they or us, like we don't store the copy of the ID so that some hacker can go and steal it. We have a certificate that says that we checked that ID, that these are the tests that we did, and we're sure that this person is who they say they are. So it's a very different proposition if a hacker were to just get a certificate that says we did a test, as opposed to, hey, here's the picture, here's the ID, which is right now, if you go just to a normal doctor, right, and they scan your ID, they scan your insurance card, they actually have the pictures. So what we're proposing is something that is just common sense. We store only the information that we need to store, and we don't store something that people can identify you biometrically easily.
What do you suppose it's going to take to see widespread adoption of this, to make this be the ubiquitous next standard?
Look, it's interesting because it's already happening. After COVID, a lot of the digital channels were quite inefficient. So we were talking to a few of our bank customers, and imagine that when someone wanted before COVID to get a checking account, I would say like 95 or more than 95% of people that go to the branch, they get their checking account. But when they had to do it digitally, it's only 40% that they could get it immediately. The rest had to go through a very lengthy process, and a lot of them dropped off. So because of that, these companies had to adopt these technologies, and right now, hundreds of millions of Americans are already using them. So that's really good news. The second thing that is important is that around the world, these technologies are even more used, because the first thing we use in the US is social security number, but it's a very US-centric thing. Where we're thinking about the world, the first thing they use is an ID, that piece of paper. So around the world, everybody's using this type of technologies. And the most interesting thing is the amount of progress that it comes with it. Because 1% increase in the amount of trust that we have between each other correlates exactly to 0.86% increase in GDP. So it's almost one-to-one correlated. And so the more people use these trusted technologies, the more progress we can see. And we can see that in India. India, 12 years ago, was one of the lowest trusting societies in the world. Like only about 9% of Indians trusted each other. And what happened is that government and companies came together and built a digital identity platform that now every Indian uses, and it's pretty safe, pretty inclusive. And right now, India is the most trusting society in the world, with about 58% of Indians trusting each other. And they're growing at 9% per year. So having a strong identity system is completely correlated to progress. And certainly in the US, where about 20 years ago, we're about 50% trust. Now it's about 37% trust. These type of identities can make a big, big difference.
Ben, what do you think?
I'm not sure I'd buy it. I was a little skeptical in that interview.
Okay, fair enough.
I thought it was interesting, but and maybe this is just me being naive and set in my own ways. Mm-hmm. But I just think there's so many different ways that digital identity could be potentially abused. I think he was dismissive on some of the controls that we have on regular identification. That's certainly or non-digital identification. Mm-hmm. And that's certainly a good point. I guess I'm just a little skeptical that the technology exists now and is scalable in a way that this could be our new form of identification.
Yeah. All right. Fair enough. Well, we appreciate him coming to join us and sharing that information. Interesting stuff. We do appreciate him taking the time. This episode is brought to you by Palo Alto Networks, the leader in cybersecurity. As AI-driven attacks increase, organizations can't afford to have network security that's stuck in the past. Discover how Palo Alto Networks can help you predict what's coming and proactively secure against it with a zero-trust, AI-powered network security platform built to secure whatever, whenever, wherever. To learn more, visit paloaltonetworks.com/network security platform. That is our show. We want to thank all of you for listening. The Caveat podcast is proudly produced in Maryland at the startup studios of Data Tribe, where they're co-building the next generation of cybersecurity teams and technologies. Our senior producer is Jennifer Iben. Our executive editor is Peter Kilpie. I'm Dave Bittner.
And I'm Ben Yellen.
Thanks for listening.